I'd like you to imagine that you and I are walking down the halls of a company. As we look up at the ceiling, we see the access points, which we have strategically placed for good radio frequency coverage. Now, we already know that there's lots of things that could interrupt that signal. We could have telephones, we could have microwave ovens, we could have filing cabinets and so forth. They're in the path. But it's also very likely that we're going to have some additional access points that we didn't put there, either from hotspots that are being generated from people's phones or an employee against company policy bringing in their own access point for convenience for them. And perhaps they have it wired to the wired network and then they have their own personal Wi-Fi in the building. And the result is we really do not want any unauthorized access points within the range of our company wireless local area network. So what exactly is a rogue access point? A rogue access point is some access point that is not recognized by one of our controllers. So what I think would be fun right now is for you and I to take a look at the controller and simply ask it, hey, what rogue access points do you see right now? I also thought it would be fun, before we jump into the controller interface, let's use Insider, a third-party tool, just to validate which wireless networks are out there. And as you and I look at this, there's a whole bunch of wireless networks. A lot of them we created on the controller. And from the controller's perspective, those are great. The other ones, the other SSIDs and the access points that are advertising those, because the controller does not know about those, meaning we didn't create or manage those wireless networks on the controllers, the controller puts those access points in a category called rogue. I also want to point out that in this nugget, we're going to go ahead and take out an access point. And you'd never want to do this in an unauthorized manner. So for example, down here, I'm going to leave all of this alone. We'll treat all those guys as okay as is. This access point, or this SSID, I should say, E4200, is being advertised by an access point that I manage and I control. So in the demonstration, when we attack this rogue access point, just this one right here, realize that in a production environment, we'd only want to do this with the proper authorization. For example, it's our building, it's our floor, a rogue access point shows up in the middle of it. At that point, you might have the authorization to disrupt the service of this access point. So now that the legal disclaimer is out of the way, let's go to the controller interface and take a look at the rogues. So here we are at the controller on the monitor page. Looks like we have all three of our access points up and running and happy. And up here in the rogue summary, it shows us that we have 14 rogue access points. So let's take a look at the detail of those 14 devices. So let's go ahead and deal with this E4200 as an example. Now I also manage and control the access point advertising the Barker SSID. However, there's a whole bunch of people in my not so distant surroundings that might get very upset if we go ahead and shut that one down. So regarding E4200, that SSID, here's the current channel it's operating at, which is up in the 5 gigahertz range. It had 2 radios that detected this rogue, and that's important. For example, if we have one access point that detected a rogue, and that access point was at the edge of our building, you know what? We have a general idea of where that rogue device is. Now with an enterprise tool like Cisco Prime Infrastructure or the older WCS, that could also place that rogue on a map for us so we could visually see, based on which access point saw it, where that access point is. By default, the action for an unclassified rogue is to generate an alert. So if we had syslog destinations or SNMP set up, we could gather that information at the syslog server or at the SNMP manager. So let's dig a little deeper. Let's go ahead and click on the MAC address for that rogue SSID. Now, by default, this rogue access point falls into a class type called unclassified. So to choose a manual classification here, we can say friendly, malicious, unclassified, or custom. So we do a little research and we find out that this access point, based on location where it's at, is actually the CEO who put it up. Now, what are you going to do? Very nicely, we chat with him. Maybe we help him put some additional security on it, or maybe have a solution that's more enterprise and manageable. But at the end of the day, if the CEO wants his own access point, he's going to have it. So what we could do is simply mark that one as friendly, and that way when we see it in the future, we'll know exactly what category it's in. However, on the other hand, if this SSID of E4200 and its associated access point are not friendly, we can go ahead and mark it as malicious. But once we mark an access point as malicious and we click on apply, there's no way to undo that. You have to basically delete the access point and then automatically let the network rediscover it again, which won't take very long if that access point is still online. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as unclassified. The default state is to go ahead and generate an alert. And regarding the status, this is one of my favorite parts. We can go ahead and simply continue to receive alerts about it, or we can go to work to contain that device. Now, when we say I want to contain it, what is that going to do? That's going to basically get on that device's channel. Now, this one happens to be up in the 5 gigahertz range, and it's going to send deauth messages. And any clients who either on purpose or an accident are trying to associate with that access point are going to get the deauth messages, and they're going to remove themselves from the access point. Now, you might be saying, well, Keith, one little deauth isn't going to stop that access point from being successful. However, if we keep on doing it over and over again, like a denial of service attack, which is basically what it is against the rogue access point, people will not be able to connect to that access point. So if we scroll down a little bit more, it's currently showing us which of our authorized access points are reporting the rogue. So it's access point 1 and 2. That's fantastic. And so now if we want to go ahead and contain this rogue, or this is so serious. For example, you would not want to do this to the access point that's in the adjacent building. Let's say their signal is spilling over. You had an access point on the wall. You do not want to do an unauthorized deauthentication attack against the business next door, because that might have legal implications. So in this case, because this access point that we're about to contain is currently managed by me and controlled by me, I'm not attacking anyone else. I'm going to say go ahead and we can do between 1 and 4 access points that will all work collectively to go ahead and contain that guy by sending the deauths over and over and over again. Now at the moment, I only have 2 access points that can even see those signals, which makes me wonder why can't access point 3 see it, but that's okay. So I'm going to say in this case, go ahead and let's have 2 access points work together to contain that device. Now that doesn't mean these access points are going to stop doing their normal work. This is like the Cinderella story. Now, when your normal chores are done, I also want you to do these things. We're just adding this additional responsibility for the access point. In the free few moments you have between working with your real customers, please go ahead and do a denial of service attack with deauths against this rogue access point. So if we're sure, we'll scroll back up to the top, we'll click on apply, and then we get a warning. There may be legal issues following this containment. Are you sure you want to continue? It's all on us. Cisco is not taking any responsibility for this. So in this case, because we are sure, I'm going to click on OK. So now if we try to connect to that network, oh my gosh, it is over. There is no connecting to the E4200. So right now I'm trying on the iPhone and it fails. I try again with a tap, it fails. So we're not getting in. So that's how you contain a rogue. Now the other question is, how do you turn this off? Well, we're going to change the status and we'll simply go back to alert, click on apply, and now the controller and its access points are no longer doing the deauthentication attack against the rogue access point. And now from our client, if I go back and connect to that E4200, it allows me to connect. So to this point, we've identified that a rogue is some access point that isn't being managed by the controller. We can tell the controller about it, say, hey, it's a friendly one, no problem. We can mark it as malicious. We can also go ahead and do containment. There's a concept called event-driven RRM, which is radio resource management. And one of the cool things about RRM is that it does dynamic channel assignment. If you'll notice, all these wireless networks that we put up, we did choose which radios we were going to use up in the 5 gigahertz range, but I didn't have to choose my channels. And that's because it automatically said, okay, which channels are free? It's listening to all that space. And it simply chose some channels where currently there was no interference or no other devices. If some other interferer did come up inside of that space, the wireless controller could tell the access point, hey, you know what? We're having a little interference or competition at that frequency range. I'm going to go ahead and move you, which is pretty darn cool. It also has the ability for that Rogue AP identification, and the classification is really up to us to either manually assign it to a class, like friendly or malicious, or we can do it based on a preset of rules whenever access points that are rogue show up. We tamed that rogue by doing a deauth attack on the wireless network against the access point that we didn't recognize. And the intent right there really isn't just to do the deauth attack forever. It's to do the deauth attack until you can physically get to the place where you've triangulated that access point to be and then physically removed it or physically powered it off. And the WCS, the wireless control system, which is the older product, and Cisco Prime Infrastructure for enterprise management, both of those can actually have that rogue access point pinpointed on a map to make it a lot easier to find. And that's a really good reason, by the way, to use one of those enterprise management applications. Another technology that Cisco is using that really centers around radio resource management is something called clean air. Everybody loves clean air. There's something called an air quality index, and it goes from 1 to 100. 100 means happy. That's great. And 1 is not very happy, not very clean air. Now, it's not referring to the environment at all. What it's referring to is the clean air regarding radio frequency and wireless local area networks. So, for example, in our case, we have access point 1, access point 2, and access point 3. Now, to work with clean air, these access points have to be a model that supports clean air. Our controller has to be a version that supports clean air. But presuming that they do, and we are using it, what happens is these guys are paying attention to interferers in the network. For example, is there a microwave oven that comes on every day at 12 o'clock and is interfering at the 2.4 gigahertz range? If so, it'll be aware of that, and it can work around that. And it can simply say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and move, so the network can intelligently identify interferers. Now, when the access point sees that signal, that interference, it can also rate that at a severity, where 1 is not so bad and 100 is terrible. So that relates to interference. And the reason I point this out is because we have 2 number scales now. We have a severity level from 1 to 100, 100 being the most severe, and then we have the air quality index, which 100 is the best. That's great. We like to have clean air. So in clean air, what we can do is we can actually set up sensitivity levels. And we can tell the network, for example, okay, I want you to pay attention to air quality index. Once it goes below 60, I want to go ahead and do some event-driven radio resource management. Meaning, it drops below 60, the AQI, go ahead and take action to move channels. That would be for high sensitivity. Another setting we can use for sensitivity is medium. And the threshold for medium is 50. And the difference is simple. If we tell clean air, hey, the sensitivity level is 50, these guys won't take action to start moving around and making adjustments if they're set at a medium sensitivity until the AQI drops to 50 or below. Now, maybe we're in an environment where there's just a ton of noise, a ton of interferers, and we want to set it to low. If we had low sensitivity, the default value for that is 35. And what low sensitivity would mean to the network is that, okay, little interference is not a big deal. We won't actually start, if we're set for low sensitivity, we won't start taking action until the AQI drops to 35. And the reality is these interferers that are showing up are going to impact and reduce the AQI. So clean air has a whole bunch of really cool bells and whistles besides just being able to identify sources of interference and then proactively work around them. There's also incredible reporting that's available in the WCS and Cisco Prime Infrastructure products that can give us reports. For example, worst offenders, when the events are occurring, for example, the duty cycle, which is going to be very helpful in understanding what's really going on in that wireless space. Now, besides just having rogue access points that are sending signals on the network, is it possible that clients connected to our network also may be sending out signals that aren't quite quote-unquote appropriate? The answer is yes. So there's also wireless IPS. So wireless IPS, very much like clean air, is going to require several things to be in line. You're going to have controllers that support it and are licensed for it. You're going to need access points that support it, and also controller versions of software that work with those access points to make the entire package work together. So with wireless IPS, there's actually signatures or telltale signs that something might be going wrong. And let me share with you some details in the controller about what that looks like. To take a look at the IPS signatures for wireless, we could go to security, and on the left-hand side, under wireless protection policies, here we have some policies regarding rogue access points, and just below that we have standard signatures. So, for example, is somebody broadcasting a deauth a bad thing? No. If it's our access point containing another access point, that's a good thing. However, if some other device is doing that on our network, we definitely want to know about it. And that's just one of the examples of the wireless IPS signatures that's in place. In this video, we've had some fun with a Rogue AP. The controller identified it, and we contained it manually. By using enterprise systems like WCS and Cisco Prime Infrastructure, that same information can be fed into a mapping system, which would make it a lot easier to track down the exact location of that rogue device. We also touched on Cisco's approach to making sure the wireless is up and running all the time with advanced radio resource management using clean air, and to keep some of the well-known attacks at bay, leveraging wireless IPS. I have had a lot of fun. I'm glad you've joined me. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.